Maria Santos pushed her cleaning cart down the long corridor of Fort Henderson, the wheels squeaking softly against the polished floor. The early morning sun streamed through the tall windows, casting long shadows across the military base. She had been working as a cleaner here for 6 months now, invisible to most of the soldiers who passed by. That was exactly how she needed it to be. At 28, Maria had the kind of face that people forgot easily. Average height, brown hair usually tied back in a simple ponytail, and clothes that were practical rather than fashionable. She moved through the base like a ghost, her presence so ordinary that guards barely glanced at her identification badge anymore. But beneath this carefully constructed facade lay secrets that could change the course of international relations. Maria was not just any cleaner. She was Agent Phoenix, one of the most skilled operatives working for a classified government agency that operated in the shadows between legitimate intelligence services. For the past 3 years, she had been tracking a dangerous arms trafficking network that had connections reaching into the highest levels of military command. Fort Henderson was suspected to be a key hub in this operation, and Maria's assignment was to gather evidence while maintaining perfect cover. The cleaning job was ideal. It gave her access to areas that would be impossible to reach through any other means. Officers' quarters, classified meeting rooms, communication centers. She could move through them all with a mop and bucket, practically invisible to the trained soldiers around her. The irony was not lost on her that some of the most dangerous intelligence work happened while scrubbing floors and emptying trash cans. As she entered the main barracks building, Maria's trained eyes automatically scanned for anything unusual. The soldiers were going about their morning routines, some heading to the mess hall for breakfast, others preparing for training exercises. She had memorized the schedule of every unit on the base, knew which officers would be where at any given time. This knowledge was crucial for her real work. Her first stop was Colonel Matthews' office on the 2nd floor. The colonel was currently in a meeting with the base commander, which gave Maria exactly 43 minutes to search his office thoroughly. She knocked softly on the door, waited for a response that didn't come, then used her master key to enter. The cleaning credentials had taken months to establish, but they gave her legitimate access to almost every room on the base. Matthew's office was spartanly decorated, as befitted a career military man. A large desk dominated the room, with filing cabinets along one wall, and a bookshelf filled with military manuals and strategic texts. Maria began her work, but her movements were far from random. While appearing to dust and organize, she was actually photographing documents with a tiny camera hidden in her cleaning supplies, checking for hidden compartments, and planting nearly invisible listening devices in strategic locations. In the 3rd filing cabinet, behind a folder marked Personnel Reviews, Maria found what she was looking for. A series of shipping manifests that didn't match the official base inventory records. The dates and quantities suggested that significant amounts of military hardware were being moved off base without proper documentation. Her pulse quickened as she photographed each page, but her expression remained calm and focused. The sound of footsteps in the hallway made her freeze. Someone was approaching, and the heavy, measured gait suggested military boots. Maria quickly returned the files to their exact position and resumed her cleaning, spraying furniture polish on the colonel's desk just as the door opened. "Who authorized you to be in here?" The voice was sharp, authoritative. Maria turned around, putting on her practiced expression of mild confusion mixed with deference. "I'm sorry, sir. I'm just doing my regular cleaning. I have authorization to." She stopped mid-sentence as she got a good look at the man in the doorway. General Harrison Blake stood in the entrance, his imposing figure filling the frame. At 55, he was a decorated veteran with silver hair and steel-gray eyes that seemed to miss nothing. His uniform was pristine, every decoration in perfect place, and his bearing spoke of decades of command authority. Maria had studied his file extensively. He was the base commander and, according to her intelligence, potentially the key figure in the trafficking operation. "Let me see your identification," Blake said, stepping into the room. Maria reached for her badge with hands that showed just the right amount of nervousness. Not too much to suggest she was hiding something significant, but enough to seem like a civilian employee intimidated by a high-ranking officer. "Of course, General. I'm Maria Santos from the cleaning service." Blake examined her badge carefully, his eyes noting every detail. "You're new." "6 months now, sir. I usually work the early morning shift when most people aren't around. I don't like to disturb anyone." The general's gaze was penetrating, and Maria felt the familiar tightness in her chest that came with being under scrutiny. She had been in far more dangerous situations, had fooled intelligence officers and foreign agents. But there was something about Blake's examination that felt particularly thorough. "You do good work," he said finally, glancing around the office. "Very thorough." "Thank you, sir. I take pride in my job." Blake nodded slowly, but he didn't leave. Instead, he moved to his colleague's desk and began looking through some papers, effectively trapping Maria in the room. She continued cleaning, working around him, but she could feel his attention on her like a physical weight. "Tell me, Miss Santos, what did you do before you came to work here?" The question seemed casual, but Maria's training told her it wasn't. "I worked for a private cleaning company in the city. Hotels, mostly. But this job pays better, and the schedule works well for me." "Family?" "No, sir. Just me." Blake picked up a photograph from the desk, Colonel Matthews with his unit during a training exercise. "It must be interesting work, cleaning a military base. You must see a lot of things, overhear conversations." Maria felt the subtle probe in his words. "I try not to pay attention to anything that's not my business, General. I just focus on doing my job well." "Very wise." Blake set down the photograph and turned to face her directly. "Security is important here. We handle sensitive materials, and we need to be sure that everyone on the base understands the importance of discretion." "Absolutely, sir. I signed all the confidentiality agreements when I was hired." The general smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I'm sure you did. Well, don't let me keep you from your work." He moved toward the door, but then paused. "Oh, Miss Santos, you might want to have that looked at." Maria's blood turned to ice. "Sir." Blake was looking at her left wrist, where the sleeve of her cleaning uniform had ridden up slightly. There, just visible at the edge of the fabric, was the corner of what appeared to be a tattoo. Without thinking, Maria pulled her sleeve down. "It's nothing, sir. Just a small design I got when I was younger. A mistake, really." "We all make mistakes when we're young," Blake said thoughtfully. "Though some mistakes are more permanent than others. Have a good day, Miss Santos." After he left, Maria forced herself to finish cleaning the office at a normal pace, even though every instinct screamed at her to flee. Her heart was pounding, but she maintained her cover. The tattoo Blake had glimpsed was supposed to be completely hidden. It was a small phoenix, the symbol of her agency, located on her inner wrist. She had been careful to keep it covered at all times, but the physical demands of cleaning work had caused her sleeve to shift. The question was, how much had Blake actually seen, and how much did he suspect? As she left the office and continued her rounds, Maria's mind raced through possibilities. The general could simply have been making conversation, or he could be probing based on genuine suspicion. Military commanders were trained to notice details, to spot things that didn't belong. A cleaning lady with what appeared to be a tactical tattoo would definitely qualify as something worth investigating. Her next stop was the communications center in the basement. This was always the most dangerous part of her routine, as it housed the base's main computer servers and classified communication equipment. The two guards at the entrance knew her by sight now, and barely looked up as she badged in. Inside the center, Maria worked quickly but carefully. Hidden within her cleaning supplies was sophisticated electronic equipment that could tap into data streams and copy classified files. While wiping down workstations and emptying trash bins, she was actually downloading terabytes of information that her handlers would analyze for evidence of the trafficking operation. The work was painstakingly slow. Each computer terminal had to be accessed individually, and the data copying had to be done in small increments to avoid detection by the base's security systems. Maria had developed a system where she could work on 3 terminals simultaneously, appearing to simply be doing routine maintenance while actually conducting high-level espionage. 25 minutes into the process, her earpiece crackled with a low-frequency warning signal. Someone was approaching the communications center with high-level clearance. Maria quickly finished her current download and moved to a position where she would appear to be legitimately cleaning when whoever it was arrived. The door opened, and Colonel Matthews entered, along with 2 other officers Maria recognized as department heads. They were deep in conversation about shipping schedules and inventory discrepancies, exactly the kind of discussion that confirmed her suspicions about the trafficking operation. The general wants a full audit of all outgoing material, Matthews was saying. Something has him concerned about our security protocols. One of the other officers, a major whose name Maria remembered as Thompson, looked worried. Do you think there's been a breach? He didn't say specifically, but Blake doesn't usually order audits without good reason. We need to make sure all our documentation is in order. Maria continued cleaning, but every word of their conversation was being recorded by devices hidden throughout the room. This was exactly the kind of intelligence she needed, confirmation that there were irregularities in the base's operations, and that General Blake was taking steps to investigate them. But, as she listened, a disturbing thought occurred to her. What if Blake's sudden interest in security wasn't because he was investigating the trafficking operation, but because he suspected there was a spy on the base? Her encounter with him earlier could have triggered an investigation that would ultimately expose not just her mission, but the entire network of operatives working to stop the arms dealers. The officers continued their discussion for another 15 minutes before leaving. Maria finished her work in the communications center and made her way back to the main level, her mind churning with new concerns. The mission had just become significantly more complicated. As she emerged from the basement, Maria nearly collided with a young soldier who was hurrying toward the communications center. He apologized quickly and continued on his way, but something about the encounter felt off. The soldier's movement had been too purposeful, too focused, and he had given her a look that seemed more observant than accidental. Maria's paranoia kicked into high gear. In her line of work, coincidences were rare and usually dangerous. First, the general's unexpected appearance and pointed questions, then the officers discussing security audits, and now a soldier who seemed to be paying too much attention to her movements. Either she was becoming overly suspicious, or her cover was beginning to unravel. She decided to test her theory. Instead of following her normal cleaning route, Maria took a detour through the east wing of the building, using reflective surfaces and strategic pauses to check if anyone was following her. Sure enough, the same young soldier appeared twice in locations where he had no obvious business being. The situation was deteriorating rapidly. Maria needed to complete her intelligence gathering and get word to her handlers, but she also needed to avoid triggering a full security investigation that would blow her cover and potentially expose other operatives. It was a delicate balance that required all her training and experience. As she continued her work, cleaning bathrooms and common areas while actually conducting reconnaissance, Maria began formulating contingency plans. She had been in dangerous situations before, had escaped from foreign prisons, and evaded capture by hostile intelligence services. But this felt different. She was trapped inside a military installation, surrounded by trained soldiers, with limited escape routes and a growing list of people who might be suspicious of her true identity. The tattoo incident with General Blake continued to trouble her. The phoenix symbol was small and abstract enough that it could be dismissed as a random design, but Blake was clearly an experienced officer with sharp instincts. If he decided to investigate her background more thoroughly, her carefully constructed cover story would not withstand serious scrutiny. By noon, Maria had completed the first phase of her daily routine. She had gathered significant intelligence, including evidence of the shipping discrepancies and recordings of conversations that suggested a cover-up was underway. But she had also potentially exposed herself to discovery, and the base's security posture seemed to be heightening by the hour. As she prepared to move to the officers' quarters for the afternoon phase of her work, Maria made a decision. She would accelerate her timeline and attempt to gather the final pieces of evidence she needed within the next 48 hours. After that, she would need to extract herself from the base and disappear before the investigation she suspected was coming could identify her as anything other than a simple cleaning lady. The next 2 days would be the most dangerous of her career, requiring her to take greater risks while maintaining perfect cover. But the information she had already gathered suggested that the arms trafficking operation was larger and more dangerous than anyone had suspected. The stakes were too high to abandon the mission now, even if it meant putting her own life in greater jeopardy. As Maria pushed her cart toward the next building, She didn't notice General Blake watching her from his office window 3 floors above, or the fact that he was making notes in a small, leather-bound book that he kept locked in his personal safe. The following morning brought unexpected challenges. Maria arrived at her usual time, but the guard at the main entrance studied her identification badge much longer than normal. His scrutiny was thorough and professional, the kind of examination that suggested new security protocols were already being implemented. "Morning, Miss Santos," the guard said, his tone neutral but alert. "I need to check your cleaning supplies today." Maria's stomach tightened, but she maintained her calm demeanor. "Of course, officer. Is there a problem?" "Just routine security enhancement." Orders came down from the top. As the guard methodically examined her cart, Maria watched his movements carefully. He was looking for specific things, not conducting a random search. His hands moved with practiced efficiency, checking for hidden compartments and unusual equipment. Fortunately, her most sophisticated spy gear was disguised as ordinary cleaning products, designed to pass exactly this kind of inspection. After 5 tense minutes, the guard waved her through. "Thank you for your cooperation, ma'am." Maria proceeded into the base, but the message was clear. General Blake was tightening security, and she was now operating under increased surveillance. Every movement would be watched, every deviation from routine noted and analyzed. Her first destination was the administrative wing, where she needed to access personnel files to identify other potential conspirators in the trafficking operation. The hallways seemed more crowded than usual, with soldiers moving purposefully between offices. The entire base felt different, charged with an energy that spoke of heightened alertness. In the records office, Maria worked with extra care. The filing cabinets contained detailed information about every person on the base, from commanding officers to support staff. She was looking for financial records, travel patterns, and communication logs that might indicate who else was involved in moving illegal weapons off the base. While photographing documents, Maria discovered something that made her blood run cold. There was a file on her. Maria Santos, cleaning staff, hired 6 months ago. But the file contained details that weren't part of her cover story. Someone had been investigating her background, and they had found inconsistencies. The file noted that her previous employer, the hotel cleaning service she claimed to have worked for, had no record of her employment. It also mentioned that her social security number showed gaps in employment history that didn't match her stated work experience. Most alarming of all, there was a note about requesting additional background checks from federal agencies. Maria photographed the file quickly, her hands steady despite her racing heart. Someone, probably General Blake, was actively investigating her. The question was how much they had discovered, and how much time she had before her cover was completely blown. As she finished in the records office, Maria noticed increased foot traffic in the hallway outside. Soldiers were moving with purpose, and she caught fragments of conversations about security sweeps and background verifications. The net was closing, and she needed to accelerate her mission timeline dramatically. Her next target was General Blake's personal quarters. It was the most dangerous location she could attempt to access, but it was also likely to contain the most valuable intelligence. If Blake was the key figure in the trafficking operation, evidence would be hidden in his private spaces, away from the scrutiny of other officers. Blake's quarters were in the senior officer's residential building, a 2-story structure with enhanced security measures. Maria had observed the patrol patterns for weeks and knew there was a 20-minute window each afternoon when the building's security was at its lightest. She would have to move fast and take significant risks. At exactly 2:15 p.m., Maria approached the residential building with her cleaning cart. The guard recognized her and allowed her entry after another thorough inspection of her supplies. She made her way to the 2nd floor, where Blake's apartment was located at the end of the hallway. The door was secured with both a standard lock and an electronic keypad. Maria had prepared for this, carrying lock-picking tools disguised as cleaning implements and a small device that could crack simple electronic codes. But as she worked on the locks, footsteps echoed in the stairwell. Someone was coming up to the 2nd floor. Maria quickly abandoned the lock-picking attempt and began cleaning the hallway, positioning herself near Blake's door, but appearing to focus on the floor tiles. The footsteps belonged to Major Thompson, one of the officers she had overheard discussing the security audit. "Working late today, Miss Santos?" Thompson asked, his tone friendly but his eyes watchful. "Yes, sir. Trying to catch up on some areas I missed earlier this week." Thompson nodded and continued to his own quarters, but Maria noticed him glance back at her twice before disappearing into his apartment. Another observer added to her growing list of problems. She waited 10 minutes before returning to Blake's door. This time, she worked faster, her training allowing her to pick both locks in under 3 minutes. The apartment door swung open silently, and Maria stepped inside. Blake's quarters were spartanly furnished, but meticulously organized. The main room contained a desk, bookshelves, and a small seating area. Personal photographs showed Blake with various military units throughout his career, and commendations covered one wall. But Maria was looking for hidden elements, the kind of concealment that would hide illegal activities. Behind a bookshelf, she found a hidden safe. It was military-grade security, far beyond what would be needed for personal valuables. Maria attached a small device to the safe's electronic lock, a piece of equipment that could crack most encryption codes given enough time. While it worked, she searched the rest of the apartment. In Blake's bedroom, underneath a loose floorboard beneath his bed, Maria discovered something that changed everything she thought she knew about the situation. It was a communication device, sophisticated and compact, designed for secure transmissions. But the frequency bands it was configured for matched those used by her own intelligence agency. Maria stared at the device, her mind racing through implications. Either General Blake was working with foreign intelligence services, or he was something else entirely. The equipment was too advanced for standard military communications, but it was also too sophisticated for typical criminal operations. A soft beep from the living room indicated that her safe-cracking device had succeeded. Maria quickly returned to the safe and opened it, revealing its contents. Inside were documents that made her question everything about her mission. The papers showed that Blake had been conducting his own investigation into the arms trafficking operation. There were surveillance photos of suspected conspirators, financial records tracking illegal transactions, and communication intercepts that revealed the scope of the criminal network. But, most shocking of all, there was a file on Agent Phoenix, on her. Blake knew exactly who she was. The file contained her real name, her agency affiliation, and details about her current mission that only a handful of people should have known. It also contained analysis of her cover story and observations about her behavior on the base. Blake had been watching her as carefully as she had been watching him. But the file also revealed something else. According to the documents, Blake was not part of the trafficking operation. He was trying to stop it, just as she was. The general was conducting a parallel investigation, using his position as base commander to identify the real criminals. Maria's hands trembled as she photographed the documents. She had been operating under false assumptions, treating an ally as an enemy. But, more importantly, if Blake knew her identity and was working toward the same goals, why hadn't he made contact through proper channels? The answer came in the form of additional documents that revealed the scope of the conspiracy. The trafficking operation included members of her own agency. The very people who had sent her on this mission were potentially compromised, which meant that normal communication channels couldn't be trusted. Blake had been trying to identify the traitors within both the military and intelligence communities while avoiding alerting them to his investigation. His apparent suspicion of her might have been a way to gauge whether she was part of the conspiracy or truly working to stop it. As Maria continued reading, she discovered that Blake had identified 3 key conspirators on the base: Colonel Matthews, Major Thompson, and Communications Officer Captain Sarachun. All 3 had been involved in altering shipping records and facilitating the movement of weapons off the base. But they were working for someone higher up the chain, someone with access to classified intelligence operations. A sound in the hallway made Maria freeze. Heavy footsteps were approaching, and they had the measured cadence of military boots. Someone was coming to Blake's apartment, and she was trapped inside with no easy escape route. Moving quickly but silently, Maria returned everything to its original position and closed the safe. She had memorized the documents rather than photographing them all, a skill that had saved her life in previous missions. As the footsteps stopped outside the door, Maria looked desperately for a hiding place. The apartment had limited concealment options. Behind the couch would be too obvious, and the bedroom was too far away. Maria spotted a narrow space between a tall bookshelf and the wall, just wide enough for a person if they pressed themselves flat against the surface. She squeezed into the space just as the front door opened. Through the gap between books, she could see General Blake entering his apartment, but he wasn't alone. Colonel Matthews was with him, and their conversation began immediately. The background check on the cleaning lady came back inconclusive, Matthews was saying. Her employment history has gaps, and her references don't check out completely. Blake closed the door and moved to his desk. What's your recommendation, Colonel? I think we should bring her in for questioning. There's something about her that doesn't fit. Maria's heart pounded as she listened to them discuss her fate. Blake was maintaining his cover as a suspicious commanding officer, while Matthews revealed his own role in the conspiracy by pushing for her arrest. It was a dangerous game for both of them. Before we take that step, Blake said carefully, I want to be absolutely certain. False accusations against civilian employees can create significant problems for the base. Have you found any direct evidence of wrongdoing? Matthews shifted uncomfortably. Nothing concrete yet, but my instincts tell me she's not what she appears to be. The way she moves, the way she observes everything around her. It's not normal behavior for a cleaning person. Your instincts may be correct, Blake replied. But we need more than suspicion to justify detention. Continue the surveillance, and let me know if you discover anything definitive. After Matthews left, Blake remained in his living room for several minutes, apparently reviewing papers at his desk. Maria waited in her hiding place, barely breathing, as he moved around the apartment. At one point, he walked directly past the bookshelf where she was concealed, close enough that she could have reached out and touched him. Finally, after what felt like hours but was probably only 20 minutes, Blake left the apartment. Maria waited another 10 minutes to be certain he wasn't returning before emerging from her hiding spot. Her legs were cramped and her back ached from the uncomfortable position, but she had gained invaluable intelligence. The situation was far more complex than she had realized. Blake was an ally, but he was also in danger from his own officers. Matthews was actively working to expose her, which meant her time on the base was extremely limited. Most importantly, there were traitors within her own agency who might compromise any attempt to communicate through normal channels. Maria needed to find a way to make contact with Blake without alerting the conspirators to their mutual awareness. She also needed to complete her evidence gathering and find a way to safely extract both herself and the intelligence she had collected. As she prepared to leave Blake's apartment, Maria made a crucial decision. She would leave a sign that only Blake would recognize, something that would indicate she knew about his investigation and wanted to cooperate. On his desk, she rearranged 3 pins to form the shape of a phoenix, subtle enough to appear accidental, but meaningful enough for someone looking for signs of intelligence activity. Exiting the apartment was nerve-wracking, but the hallway was empty. Maria returned to her normal cleaning routine, working through the residential building while her mind processed everything she had learned. The mission had transformed from a simple infiltration operation into a complex web of competing investigations and hidden loyalties. That evening, as Maria returned to her small apartment off base, she noticed the same young soldier from the previous day sitting in a car across the street. The surveillance was becoming overt, which meant Matthews was escalating his investigation. She had very little time left before her cover would be completely blown. Inside her apartment, Maria activated a secure communication device hidden inside her television. She couldn't contact her normal handlers, since they might be compromised, but she had access to an emergency frequency that connected directly to a crisis management team. The transmission would be brief and coded, but it might be her only chance to report her discoveries. Phoenix to Nest, she transmitted in the coded language her agency used for emergency communications. Situation complex. Multiple players. Require immediate consultation. The response came back within minutes. Consultation approved. Standard protocol. The standard protocol meant she should continue her mission while waiting for further instructions. But Maria knew that standard protocols might not apply when her own agency was potentially compromised. She would have to trust her judgment and make decisions that could affect not only her life, but the lives of other operatives and the success of operations around the world. As she prepared for what might be her final day on the base, Maria reviewed everything she had learned. Blake was an ally who was conducting his own investigation. Matthews, Thompson, and Chun were conspirators working for unknown higher authorities. Her own agency had been infiltrated by traitors who were feeding information to the arms trafficking network. The challenge now was to complete her mission without getting caught, expose the real criminals, and somehow make contact with Blake to coordinate their efforts. It was a task that would require all her skills as an operative and more than a little luck. But the stakes were too high to fail, and Maria had never been one to back down from a challenge, no matter how dangerous it became. Tomorrow would bring new risks and new opportunities. The question was whether she would survive long enough to see the mission through to its conclusion. Maria's third day on the increasingly dangerous mission began with an ominous development. As she arrived at the base entrance, 2 additional guards flanked the normal checkpoint, and all civilian employees were being subjected to enhanced security screenings. The atmosphere was tense, with soldiers moving with the purposeful urgency that suggested something significant was about to happen. The guard who searched her belongings was different from the previous days, a stern-faced sergeant who examined every item in her cleaning cart with methodical precision. He spent extra time studying her identification badge, comparing it to information on his computer screen. Maria maintained her nervous civilian facade while internally calculating escape routes and contingency plans. There's been some concern about security protocols, the sergeant explained as he continued his search. We're implementing additional verification procedures for all personnel. I understand, officer. Whatever is necessary for the base's security. After 15 minutes of examination, the guard finally allowed her to proceed, but Maria noticed that he made notes on his clipboard and spoke quietly into his radio after she passed. The net was tightening rapidly, and she estimated she had perhaps 6 hours before her cover would be completely compromised. Her first priority was reaching the communications center to transmit the intelligence she had gathered before it became impossible to do so. But as she approached the basement facility, Maria discovered that access had been restricted. A new security checkpoint had been established, and only personnel with enhanced clearance were being allowed entry. This development confirmed her worst fears. The conspirators were moving to shut down her investigation before she could complete it. They were using Blake's legitimate security concerns as cover for their own efforts to eliminate her as a threat. It was a clever strategy that made it difficult for Blake to oppose the restrictions without appearing to compromise base security. Maria needed a new plan. If she couldn't access the communications center directly, she would have to find another way to transmit her intelligence and make contact with Blake. The general was her only ally on the base, but reaching him without alerting the conspirators would require careful maneuvering. She decided to take a calculated risk. Instead of following her normal cleaning route, Maria made her way to the administrative wing where Blake's office was located. If she could find him alone, even for a few minutes, she might be able to establish communication and coordinate their efforts. Blake's office was on the 3rd floor of the command building, behind layers of security that would normally be impossible for a civilian cleaner to penetrate. But Maria had been observing the patterns of guards and staff for months, and she knew there was a brief window each morning when the office would be accessible. As she approached the command building, Maria noticed increased activity around the entrance. Staff officers were moving with unusual urgency, and she overheard fragments of conversation about operational security and potential threats. The base was clearly preparing for some kind of action, possibly the arrest of suspected personnel. Inside the building, Maria used her cleaning credentials to access the service elevator that led to the upper floors. The elevator required a security card, but she had duplicated several cards over the course of her mission, including one that provided access to administrative areas. The 3rd floor corridor was unusually quiet, with most personnel apparently attending meetings or briefings elsewhere in the building. Maria moved quickly toward Blake's office, her cleaning cart providing cover for her presence in the area. She had perhaps 10 minutes before the increased security protocols would make her presence here impossible to explain. Blake's office door was slightly ajar, and Maria could hear the general speaking on the phone. His conversation was professional but tense, discussing timeline acceleration and resource allocation. She waited in the hallway, cleaning the same section of floor repeatedly while listening for the call to end. Finally, the conversation concluded, and Maria heard Blake moving around his office. She approached the door and knocked softly. "Come in," Blake's voice called out. Maria entered the office, closing the door behind her. Blake looked up from his desk, his expression shifting from mild curiosity to sharp alertness as he recognized her. For a moment, neither spoke, each assessing the other and the potential risks of the situation. "Miss Santos," Blake said finally, his tone carefully neutral. "I wasn't expecting a visit from housekeeping this morning. I apologize for the interruption, General. I was wondering if you had noticed anything missing from your quarters yesterday." It was a coded message, referring to her presence in his apartment and the phoenix symbol she had left on his desk. Blake's eyes narrowed slightly, and she could see him processing the implications of her words. "Nothing is missing," he replied slowly, "though I did notice some items had been rearranged, almost as if someone with a good eye for detail had been through the room." Maria felt a wave of relief. Blake understood that she had been in his apartment and had recognized the signal she left behind. Now they could speak more directly, though they still needed to be careful about who might be listening. "I believe we have mutual interests, General. There are some irregularities in the base operations that might concern you." Blake stood up from his desk and moved to a position where he could watch the door while they talked. "What kind of irregularities?" "Shipping discrepancies, communication anomalies, personnel with questionable loyalties. The kind of problems that could affect base security." "I see." Blake's expression was carefully controlled, but Maria could see the intelligence working behind his eyes. "And you believe you have information about these irregularities?" "I believe I do. I also believe that certain members of your staff may be working against the base's interests." Blake nodded slowly. "Colonel Matthews has been expressing concerns about your background, Miss Santos. He believes you may not be what you appear to be." "Colonel Matthews is correct. I am not what I appear to be. The question is whether that makes me a threat to the base or an asset. That depends on who you really work for and what your objectives are." Maria made a decision that went against all her training. She was about to reveal her identity to someone who had not been properly vetted through her agency's channels. But, given the evidence of infiltration within her own organization, normal protocols might actually be more dangerous than this direct approach. "I work for a classified government agency investigating arms trafficking through military installations. My mission is to identify and stop the illegal movement of weapons that are ultimately reaching hostile foreign powers." Blake's expression didn't change, but Maria saw his shoulders relax slightly. "And what have you discovered?" "That Colonel Matthews, Major Thompson, and Captain Chun are involved in altering records and facilitating unauthorized shipments. They're working for someone with high-level security clearance who has access to intelligence operations. I also discovered that you've been conducting your own investigation." "How did you discover that?" "I found your hidden safe and the documents inside. I apologize for the intrusion, but I needed to determine whether you were part of the conspiracy or working against it." Blake was quiet for a long moment, clearly weighing the risks and benefits of full cooperation. Finally, he spoke. "The trafficking operation is more extensive than you realize. It involves personnel from multiple agencies and has been operating for at least 2 years. I've been trying to identify all the participants before taking action, but recent events have forced me to accelerate my timeline." "What recent events?" "The arrival of an undercover operative who has been gathering evidence." "You, Miss Santos, or should I call you Agent Phoenix?" Maria was startled by his use of her operational codename. "How do you know that designation?" "Because I've been in contact with elements of your agency that are not compromised. They've been providing me with information about your mission while keeping your handlers in the dark. It's the only way to ensure that the traitors don't realize how much we know." The revelation that Blake was already working with her agency, albeit through different channels, changed everything. She was not operating alone, and her mission was part of a larger operation designed to expose the full extent of the trafficking network. "Who in my agency can be trusted?" Maria asked. "Deputy Director Rebecca Carter and her crisis management team. They've been running a parallel investigation and were the ones who suggested placing an operative inside this base. Your regular handlers have been deliberately kept uninformed to prevent leaks." Maria felt a wave of relief mixed with anger. She had been operating under extreme stress, believing she was alone, and potentially betrayed by her own people. The knowledge that there was a support structure, even if it was hidden, made the situation more manageable. "What's the current plan?" she asked. Blake moved to his desk and retrieved a folder from a locked drawer. "We're going to arrest Matthews, Thompson, and Chen tonight during a simulated security exercise. Their communications will be monitored to identify their handlers, and we'll work up the chain to expose the entire network. Your evidence will be crucial for prosecution. What about the enhanced security measures? Matthews is pushing for my detention. The security measures are legitimate, designed to prevent the conspirators from destroying evidence or escaping once they realize we're moving against them. As for Matthews' concerns about you, I've been stalling his investigation while we prepare to take action." Maria pulled out a small data drive from her cleaning supplies. "I've gathered extensive documentation of the illegal shipments, recorded conversations, and financial records. This should provide the evidence you need." Blake took the drive and connected it to a secure computer terminal on his desk. As he reviewed the files, his expression grew increasingly grave. "This is more comprehensive than anything we've been able to gather through official channels. How did you access some of these systems?" "Cleaning people are invisible, General. We have access to areas and equipment that would be off-limits to anyone in uniform. That invisibility was the key to gathering this intelligence. It was also nearly your death sentence. Matthews has been pushing for your arrest with increasing urgency. I estimate you have perhaps 2 hours before I can no longer prevent him from taking action." A knock on the office door interrupted their conversation. Blake quickly locked the data drive in his desk drawer and motioned for Maria to resume her cleaning duties. "Come in," Blake called out. Colonel Matthews entered the office, his expression tense and determined. "General, I need to speak with you about the cleaning staff situation. We've discovered additional irregularities that require immediate action." Maria continued cleaning, but she could feel Matthews' attention focused on her presence in the room. The colonel was clearly suspicious of finding her here, especially during such a sensitive period. "What kind of irregularities, Colonel?" Blake asked. "Our background investigation revealed that Maria Santos doesn't exist prior to 6 months ago. Her social security number was issued recently, her employment history is fabricated, and her references are all false. She's clearly operating under an assumed identity." Blake appeared to consider this information carefully. "That is concerning. What do you recommend?" "Immediate detention and interrogation. We need to determine who she really is and what she's doing on this base. For all we know, she could be a foreign agent gathering intelligence for hostile powers." "Your concerns are noted, Colonel. However, I want to be certain we handle this properly. False imprisonment of a civilian employee could create significant legal problems for the base. Do you have any evidence of actual espionage activity?" Matthews looked frustrated by Blake's cautious approach. "General, with respect, we can't afford to wait for direct evidence of espionage. The potential security breach is too significant to ignore." "I understand your position, Colonel. Give me 2 hours to review the situation and consult with base legal counsel. If we're going to detain a civilian, I want to ensure we have proper justification." After Matthews left, Blake turned to Maria with an expression of urgency. "You need to leave the base immediately. Matthews will override my authority if necessary to have you arrested. In 2 hours, I won't be able to protect you." "What about the operation against the conspirators?" "It will proceed as planned. We have enough evidence now, thanks to your intelligence gathering. Your part in this mission is complete." Maria felt a mixture of relief and concern. The mission was succeeding, but leaving now felt like abandoning Blake to face dangerous enemies alone. "What if Matthews or the others realize you're working against them?" "It's a risk I have to take. My position gives me some protection, and once we move against them tonight, the immediate danger will be over." Blake wrote something on a piece of paper and handed it to Maria. "This is the address of a safe house in the city. Go there and wait for contact from Deputy Director Carter's team. They'll debrief you and arrange for your extraction to a secure location." As Maria prepared to leave, Blake added, "Your work here has been exceptional, Agent Phoenix. You've helped expose a network that was causing significant damage to national security. The weapons they were trafficking have been linked to terrorist attacks overseas." "Thank you, General. And be careful tonight. These people have killed to protect their operation." Maria left Blake's office with mixed emotions. The mission was largely successful, But she was leaving behind someone who had become an unlikely ally in a dangerous situation. As she made her way out of the building, she could feel the weight of surveillance from multiple sources. The next few hours would be crucial. She needed to exit the base without triggering immediate pursuit, reach the safe house, and prepare for whatever came next. But, for the first time in days, she felt like she was working with allies rather than against unknown enemies. The base was still in heightened security mode, but Maria's cleaning credentials allowed her to leave without excessive scrutiny. As she drove away from Fort Henderson, she could see military vehicles positioning themselves around the base perimeter. Blake was preparing for the confrontation with the traffickers, and, by tomorrow morning, the conspiracy would be exposed. But, as Maria drove toward the safe house, she noticed a black sedan following her at a discreet distance. Either Blake's protection wasn't as complete as he thought, or someone else was interested in her movements. The mission might be complete, but her personal danger was far from over. The black sedan maintained its distance as Maria drove through the city streets toward the safe house. She used every evasive driving technique in her arsenal, taking random turns, doubling back, and using traffic patterns to test whether she was actually being followed. The sedan stayed with her through every maneuver, confirming her worst fears. Someone had compromised her extraction route. Maria's mind raced through possibilities. Either Blake had been discovered and forced to reveal her escape plan, or the corruption within her agency ran deeper than anyone had realized. The safe house address might be a trap, designed to capture her before she could deliver her intelligence to trustworthy handlers. Making a split-second decision, Maria abandoned her route to the safe house and headed instead toward a backup location she had established during her first week on the mission. It was a small storage unit she had rented under a false identity, equipped with emergency supplies and communication equipment. If she could reach it safely, she might be able to contact Deputy Director Carter directly. The sedan immediately adjusted its route to follow her new direction, confirming that her pursuers knew her general area rather than her specific destination. This suggested they were tracking her vehicle rather than having advanced knowledge of her safe house location. It was a small advantage, but one she could potentially exploit. Maria drove into the industrial district where her storage facility was located, using the maze of warehouses and loading docks to create obstacles for her pursuers. She executed a series of sharp turns that forced the sedan to either maintain close pursuit and reveal itself, or fall back and risk losing her entirely. The driver chose to maintain pursuit, pulling alongside her car at a red light. Through the sedan's tinted windows, Maria could see two figures in the front seat, both wearing dark clothing that suggested professional operatives rather than common criminals. One of them was speaking into a radio, coordinating with other units that might be converging on her location. When the light turned green, Maria accelerated hard and took an immediate right turn into an alley between two warehouses. The sedan had to continue straight, unable to make the sudden turn without risking a collision. It bought her perhaps 30 seconds, but that might be enough to reach the storage facility. The storage unit complex was surrounded by a chain-link fence with an automated gate that required a key card for access. Maria had memorized the entry code months ago, and she punched it in quickly as her car approached the gate. The barrier lifted just in time for her to drive through, and she immediately headed for Unit 247 in the back corner of the facility. As she parked and grabbed her emergency bag from the car, Maria could hear vehicles arriving at the main gate. Her pursuers had found the facility, but they would need time to gain access and search for her specific location. She had perhaps 5 minutes to gather what she needed and escape through the rear exit she had scouted when she first rented the unit. Inside Storage Unit 247, Maria quickly accessed a hidden panel that contained advanced communication equipment, false identification documents, and weapons. She powered up a secure satellite phone and dialed the emergency number Blake had given her for Deputy Director Carter's crisis management team. Phoenix to Nest, emergency protocol. She transmitted using the coded language that would immediately alert the receiving station to her urgent situation. The response came within seconds. Nest receiving, Phoenix. Status report. Compromised extraction. Hostile pursuit. Require immediate support. Understood. Current location. Maria provided the address of the storage facility and described her tactical situation. The voice on the other end was calm and professional, the kind of steady competence that had kept her alive through previous crises. Phoenix, we have assets en route to your location. Estimated arrival 15 minutes. Can you maintain concealment until then? Negative. Hostiles are breaching the facility perimeter now. Through the thin walls of the storage unit, Maria could hear vehicles moving through the complex and voices calling out instructions. Her pursuers were conducting a systematic search, moving from unit to unit. They would reach her location within minutes. Phoenix, there is a helicopter landing zone 4 blocks north of your position. Emergency extraction will be available there in 12 minutes. Can you reach it? Maria looked at the rear exit of the storage facility, which led to an alley that connected to the main street. From there, it was a 4-block sprint to the landing zone, but she would be exposed and potentially outnumbered by hostile operatives. Attempting to reach LZ, she transmitted. Be advised, intelligence package contains critical information about military trafficking network. Must not be compromised. Understood, Phoenix. Package is priority. Good luck. Maria gathered the most essential items from her emergency cache and prepared to leave the storage unit. As she reached for the door, she heard footsteps approaching her specific row. The search was getting closer, and she was running out of time. She cracked the door open and peered down the narrow corridor between storage units. 2 armed men in tactical gear were systematically checking each unit, while a third provided overwatch from the main aisle. Professional operation, well-coordinated, and properly equipped. These were not simple criminals or corrupt military personnel. Maria recognized the tactical markings on their equipment. These were mercenaries, probably hired by whoever was running the arms trafficking network. They were here to eliminate her and recover any evidence she had gathered. The stakes had escalated beyond simple military corruption to international black market operations. Waiting for the search team to move past her unit, Maria slipped out through a side door and began moving toward the rear of the facility. She stayed low, using the storage units for cover while making her way to the back fence. The exit route would take her through a gap in the fence she had created months earlier, leading to the alley behind the complex. As she reached the fence, Maria heard shouts behind her. Someone had discovered that her storage unit was equipped with professional-grade communication equipment, revealing that she was far more than a simple civilian employee. The search would intensify now, with her pursuers understanding they were hunting a trained operative. Maria squeezed through the fence gap and emerged into the alley. The helicopter landing zone was 4 blocks away through urban terrain that offered both cover and exposure. She would have to move fast while avoiding detection by the mercenaries who were undoubtedly coordinating to cut off her escape routes. The first block went smoothly, with Maria using parked cars and building shadows to mask her movement. But as she reached the second block, she heard the distinctive sound of motorcycle engines starting up. Her pursuers were deploying mobile units to patrol the streets around the storage facility. A motorcycle appeared at the far end of the street, moving slowly as the rider scanned the sidewalks and building entrances. Maria ducked into a doorway just as the motorcycle's headlight swept across her position. The rider continued past without seeing her, but she knew there would be others. The third block required crossing a major intersection with limited cover. Maria waited for the traffic light to change, then moved with a group of pedestrians crossing the street. She kept her head down and maintained the pace of the crowd, just another person heading home from work. But as she reached the far side of the intersection, a black SUV pulled up alongside the crosswalk. The passenger window rolled down, and Maria found herself looking at Colonel Matthews. His expression was cold and determined, and he was holding a pistol pointed directly at her. "Get in the vehicle, Agent Phoenix," Matthews ordered. "Your extraction has been canceled." Maria realized that the corruption went even deeper than she had suspected. Matthews wasn't just working with arms traffickers. He was working with the mercenaries who were hunting her. The entire operation had been compromised from the beginning. "I don't think so, Colonel," Maria replied, simultaneously dropping to a crouch and pulling the concealed pistol from her emergency kit. Matthews fired, but Maria was already moving. The bullet shattered a store window behind where she had been standing. Pedestrians screamed and ran for cover as Maria rolled behind a parked car and returned fire. Matthew's SUV accelerated away from the scene, but Maria knew he would be calling for backup. She had less than 2 minutes to reach the landing zone before every hostile operative in the area converged on her position. Maria ran full speed down the final block, abandoning stealth for speed. Behind her, she could hear vehicles approaching and the distant sound of helicopter rotors. The landing zone was a small parking lot behind an abandoned building. As Maria rounded the corner, she could see a military helicopter descending toward the asphalt, its rotor wash creating a whirlwind of dust and debris. But she could also see Matthew's SUV racing toward the same location from the opposite direction. Maria sprinted across the parking lot as the helicopter touched down. The side door slid open, revealing 2 armed operatives in tactical gear who immediately began providing covering fire. Matthew's SUV screeched to a halt at the edge of the lot, and mercenaries began deploying from multiple vehicles. "Go, go, go!" one of the helicopter operatives shouted over the rotor noise. Maria dove through the helicopter's open door just as bullets began impacting the aircraft's armored hull. The pilot immediately lifted off, banking hard to avoid ground fire from the mercenaries below. Through the window, Maria could see Matthews standing beside his SUV, watching her escape with fury written across his face. As the helicopter gained altitude and headed away from the city, one of the operatives helped Maria into a safety harness and handed her a communication headset. "Agent Phoenix, this is Deputy Director Carter." A woman's voice came through the headset. "Are you injured?" "Negative, ma'am. I'm operational." "Excellent. We monitored your communications with General Blake and received the intelligence package you compiled. The evidence you gathered is extraordinary. What's the status of the operation at Fort Henderson?" General Blake initiated arrests of Matthews, Thompson, and Chun 3 hours ago. However, Matthews had already left the base by that time. Apparently, he received warning that the operation was compromised. Maria felt a chill of realization. He knew about the arrests because he was monitoring Blake's communications. The corruption goes deeper than we thought. Our analysis suggests that the trafficking network has infiltrated multiple military installations and intelligence agencies. Your investigation at Fort Henderson was just the beginning. We're going to need your expertise for the expanded operation. Through the helicopter's windows, Maria could see the city falling away below them. The immediate danger was over, but the larger threat remained. The arms trafficking network was more sophisticated and far-reaching than anyone had realized, and exposing it would require continued dangerous undercover work. "Ma'am, I need to know about General Blake's safety. He put himself at considerable risk to help with this operation. Blake is secure and has been read into the full scope of our investigation. His cooperation will be essential for the next phase. We're going to systematically dismantle this network, starting with the intelligence we gathered from your mission." The helicopter was heading toward a military airfield where Maria would be debriefed and prepared for whatever came next. As she looked back toward the city, she thought about the past week of living as a cleaning lady while conducting one of the most dangerous intelligence operations of her career. The irony was that her cover as an invisible service worker had been the key to success. In a world of high-tech surveillance and sophisticated security measures, sometimes the best espionage was accomplished by someone with a mop and bucket who knew how to blend into the background. But the mission had also revealed something troubling about the nature of modern threats. The enemies were no longer just foreign powers or terrorist organizations. They were networks of corruption that crossed institutional boundaries, involving military personnel, intelligence operatives, and private mercenaries working together for profit rather than ideology. "Agent Phoenix," Deputy Director Carter's voice came through the headset again. "I want you to know that your work on this mission was exceptional. You identified and exposed a threat that could have remained hidden for years, potentially costing hundreds of lives." "Thank you, ma'am. What's our next step?" "Rest, recovery, and preparation. The network you've helped us identify operates across multiple continents. We're going to need your skills for operations in Europe and Southeast Asia. But first, you've earned some time to decompress from this assignment." As the helicopter approached the airfield, Maria reflected on how the mission had evolved from a simple investigation into a complex operation involving betrayal, courage, and the kind of moral ambiguity that defined modern intelligence work. She had started as a cleaning lady and ended as the key witness in what would likely become one of the most significant counterterrorism cases of the decade. The helicopter touched down at the secure facility, and Maria prepared to begin the next phase of her career as Agent Phoenix. The woman who had once been invisible while mopping floors had become one of the most valuable operatives in the fight against international crime. It was a transformation that would serve her well in the dangerous missions that lay ahead. But as she walked across the tarmac toward the debriefing facility, Maria knew she would never forget the week she spent as a cleaning lady at Fort Henderson, or the general who had spotted her secret agent tattoo, and changed everything about how she understood the nature of trust, loyalty, and the complex web of alliances that kept the world safe from those who would exploit it for profit.